What is up, guys? This is Jared and you are watching Backroad Exploration, and in today's video I want to tell you the story of what happened to my 2000 Toyota Land Cruiser. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, you know that I started out most of my adventures in the brown 2000 Toyota Land Cruiser, and I want to talk to you about why I chose that Land Cruiser and what has happened to it since then. So to kind of go into that, I need to back up just a tiny bit. I've been really into off-roading and exploring my entire life, and I really wanted to share that with my family, and I thought that doing that in a 4x4 vehicle would be able to be the best way to share it with my family and also combine some of my other passions like camping and exploring and things like that. And so when my wife and I met, I was driving a 2004 Jeep Wrangler, and it was absolutely awesome. She and I did a bunch of exploring in it through Utah and absolutely loved it. But after we got married and we started getting ready to have kids and having kids, it really was not the best vehicle for our family. We ended up getting rid of it, and ever since I got rid of it, I have missed that vehicle and where it took me in those adventures. And so while that didn't stop me from camping and things like that, it definitely slowed that down, and I really wanted to get back into it. And so I wanted to explore what my options were. And so I started looking into a bunch of different vehicles, looking at Jeeps, looking at Land Cruisers, Toyota 4Runners, and also LR3 Land Rovers. And after doing lots of research and talking to different people who own those different vehicles, I really settled in on a 100 series Land Cruiser. I was also open to the 80 series, but I was having a harder time finding some of those. I really wanted to find a really good condition 100 series Land Cruiser. And I was really focused on hopefully finding one that hadn't been wheeled too hard, preferably one that hadn't really been off-roaded at all, and was really more used as like a soccer vehicle. And I wanted to take that and transform it into an off-roading rig. And so the search began, and I looked for probably 6 months, and I spent tons of time on our local Craigslist and looking around trying to find the right rig for me, and test drove about 7 or 8 of them, and I eventually found my 2000 Toyota Land Cruiser. And it was owned by a family. It had never been off-roaded. They'd basically never been anywhere with it off pavement. It had spent most of its time in California, so it was pretty clean. Utah doesn't get rust too bad, but we definitely get some because of the snow and salt. And so the body was really clean. It ran really well. I went and took it to one of my buddies who is a Toyota expert, and he and I went and looked over a bunch of different stuff. We test drove it, and we were both really thrilled with it, especially in comparison to some of the other ones that I had tested. So I felt like I had gotten a gem and was really, really excited about it. In fact, my very first video, I think, was either that day or that weekend. I went up to American Fort Canyon and shot my We Bought a Land Cruiser video, which is like 30 seconds long, basically saying that I got a Land Cruiser. And then I had planned a trip along Skyline Drive, just like a day trip with my wife and my kids. We were just going to cruise down Skyline Drive. I was going to show her some of the sights there and really just enjoy just like an afternoon. And as we were driving, we're headed up Highway 6, and before we even got to the Tucker turnoff onto Skyline Drive, the check engine light turned on. And as you can imagine, anytime you buy something, you're a little frustrated if it doesn't work right off the bat, but I went into this pretty eyes wide open, in my opinion. I knew I was buying a high mileage vehicle, and while they're known for being able to handle high mileage really well, I was also buying a 20-year-old vehicle, and when you buy a 20-year-old vehicle that's high mileage, you're going to have things crop up. And so the vehicle was running fine. I wasn't really concerned about that, and check engine lights can mean anything, to be honest. It can be as simple as, you know, not closing your gas cap right. So because it was running fine, no issues, I was like, you know what, we're going to finish our trip. We went and did our trip, had a great time. And I went back and I plugged it in to kind of figure out what had happened. And that's where I learned a little bit more about this Land Cruiser. I'd checked for any codes before I bought it, and there were no codes. And the code that was coming back was basically telling me that there's a problem. After doing some research, I figured this out, that there's a problem with the torque converter. And not to bore you with the details, but basically the engine is producing power, sending it to the transmission, and what is basically happening in that transfer process is saying that more power should be being converted and being sent. And so because of that, it kicks on the light if it gets a certain variance off. So I jumped on I Hate Mud and was doing a bunch of research, and basically there was kind of 2 things that you could do. Well, 3 things. do nothing was the first one. A bunch of guys, I guess, have had this code. They've been driving their Land Cruisers for years with it. Not a big deal. The other option is basically go through your torque converter in your transmission and change it. Not really a good option for me after really buying this vehicle. Replacing a transmission is not in the cards for it. Sometimes you can get this code if some of the little solenoids inside the transmission go bad. And so it's kind of a gamble, and they're a little bit expensive, but it was worth a try. So I think we picked up the 2 most common ones that go bad and to see if that would solve the issue. And I should say that this is after we tried other things like just doing like a transmission flush and things like that. None of that worked. But there weren't like particulates when we did the transmission flush, and so I wasn't worried that the transmission was really in a bad state. It just wasn't basically operating the way that it did the day that it was created, which not a big deal. So I did the solenoids, nothing, didn't fix it. So I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna keep driving the Land Cruiser. Honestly, I can't tell that there's any problem whatsoever. That's what the mode is going to be moving forward. So about a month after that, I'd actually gone on a really cool trip and started, kind of building up some content for the channel, which was fun. About a month after that, I go out to the Land Cruiser, go to turn it on, and I'm sitting there turning the key, and it's just going turning over and over. So the engine is turning, the starter is turning, there's plenty of power, but the vehicle just will not start. And so I think, oh man, maybe I have a bad fuel pump. Thinking about a couple different things. Basically, I do some research, and it's none of those things. I guess this is somewhat of a common problem that happens in some of these older 100 series Land Cruisers, is it actually has an anti-theft device that when you put the key in, it recognizes that that's one of the keys for the vehicle, and it will let it start. Even though it fits in, everything's fine. And so it's actually a problem with the Land Cruiser's computer system. And so doing some research, some guys have been able to bypass that with simple things like basically taking out the ignition fuse that handles that and putting in like paper clips. That's kind of sketchy, and I wasn't super excited about it, although I did try it to see if it would even work. It didn't work. And then basically from research is the box where that fuse is going in eventually goes bad, and it can no longer recognize your keys. And so that's why guys were basically shoving stuff further down in there to get it to start. I found a guy in I Hate Mud who solved this problem for a bunch of Toyota Land Cruiser owners by basically kind of creating like this fuse bypass system that actually has a fuse in it so that you're not going to blow other crap up. And I bought it for I think about $70 from him off of there. Didn't solve the problem. And so now I'm like, man, what am I going to do? It's just stuck here. I can't even turn it on. The only way to fix it is basically replace the entire fuse box. It was like $800, I think, to pick up an OE one. And so I'm like, man, I don't know if I want to do it, but I'm like, you know what? I knew going in I was going to have some issues. This isn't necessarily at all the issue that I was anticipating, but I'm going to try it. So I replaced that. Sure enough, fixes it. Everything's going fine. So then I'm able to get in like 4 or 5 really cool adventures and trips, make some fun content, did our Poison Springs trip, and did a couple through the San Rafael Swell, and I'm really feeling good about where things are at. Decided I'm going to go down, and I ended up having this Boy Scout trip down in southern Utah in Moab, and the trip was going to end before the weekend, and I'd already taken the whole week off to go to this trip, and so I said, hey, I'm going to stick around. I'm going to go down the Schaefer switchbacks, do some exploring in the Moab area, then camp overnight, and then head home the next day. I had ran down the Schaefer switchbacks, and when I got down to the bottom, I got out to take a picture, and I could hear hissing, and so I knew that there was some type of problem with the cooling system, although it wasn't overheating yet, and so I was like, you know what, I'm going to try to get as close to Moab as I can. So I started making my way towards Moab, and sure enough, the Land Cruiser starts overheating. So I'm popping the hood and looking, and I can hear hissing, I can hear a leak, but for the life of me, I cannot figure out where it is coming from. And so eventually I get to the point where I'm going about 200 yards, stopping, parking for 15 or 20 minutes, waiting for the engine and things to cool down, then starting it back up, going another 200 yards, and just trying to limp it back along the Potash Road to where I can get to pavement, where I can get a tow truck. Once I get to pavement, I kind of start figuring things out and figuring out where I'm going to go. All my camping gear's in the Land Cruiser, which is in the tow truck, and so I ended up finding a hostel on the outside of Utah, or outside of Moab, that you can stay in for like $10 or something. It was really inexpensive, and it ended up just being this tiny little T this tiny little plastic T that basically where coolant lines are coming in and out and moving around, that had gone out and was back kind of on the back side of the engine, which is why I couldn't see it. To be honest, at this point, I'm getting pretty frustrated. I really wanted the Land Cruiser to be this adventure vehicle where I could go out and do a lot of things, and I keep having random things crop up. And one of the main things that I wanted to do with my current work schedule is I work 4/10s, and so I have a lot of time weekends to go out and do a lot of fun trips. And I want to be producing as much content as possible, and so I'm not able to do either of those things. I can't go out on the trips that I want to do. I'm not producing as much content as I want to, and I'm getting a little frustrated, and so I'm like, you know what? Maybe I need to start looking at doing a different vehicle or something else. And so I said, man, I really invested in this. We're sticking to it. And so I stick with it a little bit longer, and I ended up doing some other things like tie rods and wear items that I don't count those because that's just stuff that would go out in any vehicle over time. So I'm just mentioning that because there are other things that I fixed that aren't mentioned in this video. Then end up having a bunch of cooling problems. And to be honest, some of it could be related to really pushing the Land Cruiser to get it into town. I'll be honest, I was a little worried that I let it get too hot. So I was watching it like a hawk, but man, vehicles don't do well when you let them get hot. I had them checked. There weren't any compression issues. We didn't have any antifreeze in any places that it's not supposed to be, things like that. So I think I came out of that okay, but I'm not sure if during that process or some other point in time after, but basically I lost the radiator in it too. And that's when I kind of parked the Land Cruiser, and I'm like, all right, I got to do something else. And I'd already been missing being in a Jeep. I really like Jeeps. And so I thought, you know what, maybe I want to make a switch here. And let me be very clear, this is not a Toyota Land Cruiser bash session whatsoever. I still think very highly of Toyotas, very highly of Toyota Land Cruisers. But mine just really wasn't working out. And so I decided to start looking for another vehicle, and I spent a good part of that winter looking for a rig and test drove a bunch of different Jeep Wranglers, and I found the one that I ended up purchasing, and you can watch a video about it here. But then I still have this Land Cruiser, and I'm like, man, what do I do with this thing? It's killing me because I spent a decent chunk of money, and it's just sitting there doing nothing. And I don't feel good about selling it to anyone because it isn't running well, and it has this check engine light issue. And so it's just kind of sitting there. And for the past 10 years, I've been commuting every single day in a 1994 Chevy pickup. And that truck on its own deserves its own video. It's absolutely incredible. But one downside of it is it doesn't have air conditioning. It died about 6 years ago. And it's a decent chunk to fix the AC in it, more than the vehicle is worth. I've been going without AC for a long time, and I don't commute in the Jeep because I don't want to rack up miles on my off-roading Vig. I didn't commute in the Land Cruiser when it was my off-roading rig, but I still have this Land Cruiser sitting there. And so the OE radiator is really expensive, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. So finally I decided I've got this Land Cruiser sitting in the driveway where the air conditioning works great. I put in a off-market, like Amazon, eBay special radiator, and to see, hey, can I drive this thing through the summer, use the AC, not be dying in my truck, and actually get something out of this vehicle. And for the past 9 months, I've had the most trouble-free 9 months since owning the Land Cruiser. I've been driving it every single day. I put over 10,000 miles on it over the summer, going back and forth to work as my daily driver. It's absolutely fantastic. It's super comfortable to drive. It's not really very fuel efficient, but none of my vehicles are very fuel efficient oriented. And it's really comfortable. The AC's been working. It's been absolutely perfect. And I'm actually planning on maybe doing 1 or 2 adventures this next year in 2020 in the Land Cruiser. But if you're wondering how it's doing great. It's right there. Now that you have a little bit of an idea of what happened to the Land Cruiser, I want to just go into 2 really quick things. First of all, I am a firm believer that the best vehicle for off-roading and exploring is the one in your driveway. Use it until you figure out what it can or cannot do, and then go from there and do something else. This isn't a bash on Toyotas. This isn't an endorsement of Jeeps. It's none of those things. There's personal preference in everything. People have taken all of these rigs around the planet and back. So just go with what you're happy with and what you're going to love doing. If you started following my channel because you're a diehard Toyota enthusiast, please stick with me. You're going to see my brother in his 4Runner. You're probably going to see me in some adventures in the Land Cruiser. If you're a diehard Jeeper, you're going to see a ton of Jeep content. But I really try not to make my content focused on vehicle make or targeting a specific vehicle agenda. I want to explore the most beautiful places in the world that I'm so blessed to be around here in Utah and the surrounding states, and I want to share those adventures with you. To me, that's what's important, and that's the content that you're going to be getting. And I am really appreciative of everyone who subscribed to this channel. Please hit that notification bell so that you can get an update every single time I put out a new video. And please like, share. If you want to follow us on the day-to-day, you can check out our Instagram at Backroad Exploration. Thanks for watching.